So we are in a very wonderful moment for the market as we just had the S&P 500 once again become positive year to date. So make sure to call your ex, make sure to call your friends, call everyone you know and tell them that it is officially back on. Now I am extremely excited because not only is the market year to date in a positive area, but my portfolio, a lot of the trade ideas that I've mentioned within the Push and Profit private group have been exploding. For example, one of the trade ideas that I shared exclusively for those within the Push and Profit private group was ticker symbol HIMS, which is HIMS, and we rolled this baby up in the beginning of the year, and then we kind of just took profits right before it collapsed, and then once it started collapsing, I started buying more again because fundamentally the picture for HIMS was actually pretty darn well, and once again we ended up seeing HIMS pretty much explode once again. So of course I'm going to be super excited to see one of the biggest trade ideas for this year hit twice, right? This is almost like last year when I was talking about Nvidia stock and how Nvidia stock was going to blow up, and we ended up seeing Nvidia stock just do amazing. So if you had Nvidia in your portfolio last year, it was a good time, and if you traded HIMS this year, you probably had a lot of great moments, because when you're looking at HIMS from a year-to-date perspective, we're up 153.97% year to date. Now, quick plug, if you want to have access to my daily briefings where every day the market's open, I talk about what's going on, I share my trade ideas, then make sure to check out one of the links in the description below, because one of the links is going to be a link to join for a massive discount where you could just join for approximately $7 for the first 2 months. You could cancel at any single time. So make sure to check out that link in the description below. But let's also talk about what else is going on with the market, right? Because there's a couple things we have to talk about. Number one is, of course, inflation. Now, inflation went up a little bit in April, but overall it's still slowly cooling down, right? So prices for most goods are steady, and services like insurance and travel, yeah, they rose up a bit and are, rising, but they're rising slower than before. And so what does this mean? Well, this means that the Fed is going to be keeping an eye on things because, of course, new tariffs might make stuff like clothes and cars more expensive soon. So what this really means is, yeah, there's still a couple things that the Federal Reserve is going to be watching, right? Jerome Powell's probably going to be watching, the PPI report that we get tomorrow, the producer price index, right? We'll talk about that later on in this video. Make sure to continue watching. And we also hear from Jerome Powell. We'll kind of talk about that. But I'm believing now that we may end up seeing the Fed start to consider cutting sometime in September. Now, we know that the market's very forward-looking, so we may start to see the rally continue with the idea of this forward expectation of cuts finally coming in September. Now, we know when the Federal Reserve adjusts its monetary policy into a more stimulus kind of environment, well, that's great for a lot of companies, right? The large companies benefit, but also the smaller cap companies start to benefit tremendously, because these are the companies that have to leverage a lot of debt for expansion. And if debt is cheaper to finance, well, that means expansion is more likely to take place. So that's something that we want to keep an eye out for. Now, I also want to talk about something else, and that is the beautiful technical perspective that we're seeing with the S&P 500. See, the S&P 500 recently crossed the 200-day moving average, which is, of course, I always say that you want to look at the market from a multitude of different perspectives. You just don't want to look at things from a technical perspective, right? You want to look at the macro environment, monetary policy, fiscal policy, what's going on, right? But we have to also understand that, you want to use the data points of technicals, and when we historically see the market below the 200-day average, well, that's not good news. But when we start to see the market above the 200-day average, well, historically speaking, we tend to see the market 12 months later much higher. So this is kind of good news, and we're going to want to continue to see what's going on. Of course, things can change, right? This is not like back then where things just relied only on macros. It could literally take one post from President Trump on Truth Social that could kind of flip everything around. So don't want to be too optimistic, but for the most part, things are looking kind of nice over here. Now, I also want to highlight this relative rotation graph, and the reason I wanted to highlight this, right, is because we see that XLK, which is the technology sector, and XLY are both in the leading quadrant. Now, why is this really important? Well, one of the theories from Charles Dow, right? It's called Dow theory. It's something that you learn when you're enrolled in the chartered market technician courses that they have to earn the designation to fully understand technicals and quantitative data for interpreting the market. And so, long story short, Charles Dow is like the founder for technical analysis. And he believed that you had to look at two different averages, right? And it was the railroads and also the industrial averages. And he said, look, these averages, if they're both going up, well, that just means the overall market's going to go up. Now, things are very different from when Dow was, participating and writing about the markets, right? Because, of course, the railroad isn't like what it was before. Before, of course, that made sense because railroads pretty much hauled all the goods. Industrials, if those are growing and going up, well, that means that there's an expansion in the United States. So it made sense why Charles Dow believed that you had to look at these two averages. But we're in a modern day, and I believe, right, this is just my theory, right, it's the Justin theory, when we see technicals looking pretty bullish for technology, the technology sector, and consumer discretionaries, to me, those are the two different sectors that when they're going up, it kind of means that the overall market is also going up as well. And so it's kind of good to see when we look at the relative rotation graph that these two sectors are in the leading quadrant. But I also want to mention what we have coming up for this week, because Thursday, May 15th, we have a lot going on, but I highlighted some of the more important and notable events. For example, US retail sales. We're going to want to look what those figures are looking at. We have core PPI. We talked about this earlier in the video. This is core producer prices, the core producer price index. We're going to want to see what the producers are paying. But then we also have Philadelphia Fed manufacturing survey, and then we actually hear from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell with another speech. Now, this is probably the main event for Thursday. Markets are going to want to hear, well, hey, Jerome Powell, after all this data coming out, where are we kind of looking like we're going to start to see, the monetary policy start to shift to a less restrictive environment and a more stimulus environment. So that's kind of the main event. But of course, we also have highlighted industrial production. I mean, you guys see there's a lot going on for Thursday, a very hectic day. So I expect a lot of volatility. We're going to want to listen to the rhetoric from Jerome Powell and kind of where his stance is, right? People are going to be parsing through. I mean, people go crazy. There's this theory that people have where the type of color of the tie for Jerome Powell means that he's going to be hawkish or dovish. Nonsense, tomfoolery, that's just silly stuff. What we really want to pay attention to is his words. We don't want to pay attention to random little superstitious stuff like what color tie he wears, but really what he ends up saying. But with that said, make sure to hit that like button for this video if you haven't done so already, and also subscribe to the channel as well. And I'll see you guys on this next video right over here. Take care, guys.